Everybody assumes that DNA is linear, but it's not. It has a three-dimensional structure. The government is really keen on sequencing newborns to basically look at their progression, because all diseases other than genetic diseases are progressive. So it's the interplay between your genetic code and the environment, how adaptable your genetic code is to adapt to the environmental impacts, which are your food, your exercise, how you live your life, what you drink, if you smoke. That's basically, it's like a register of how your body's adapting, and that's what Oxford BioDynamics seeks out.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the GCS Connect Leader Series. We have Ewan Hunter today with us. He is the Chief Data Officer of Oxford BioDynamics, which is a diagnostic, a high-tech diagnostic firm within the biotechnology market. And what he works on is basically producing applications from the sequencing of genomes, DNA to lay people, and how we can use those better. And what I found really interesting about this is we're talking to a leader here who is at bleeding edge of technology, someone that sometimes this conversation is quite highly technical, and we will put up some glossary in there, but I think it's really interesting for your average listener like myself just to really realize like what it's like to be a leader within these companies, and what it's like to plan forward within a business where technology and science and innovation is moving so quickly. So without further ado, here's Ewan. Ewan, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much, David.
Fantastic. We've tried to arrange this about 3 times, and I think we were just saying one or the other of us has kind of messed it up thus far. So we've managed to do it now. So congratulations to us. Well done. So it's great to have you here, Ewan. As I was saying to you before we started, obviously, AI engineering, machine learning is an area that we've worked in GCS for many years, and we are really building out that. But as we build out this, we seem to be kind of coming into the world of biotechnology with a focus on the technology. And then we met, didn't we, at the TV AI Hub where you were presenting?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
fantastic. So a little shout out to them. It's a local Reading University sponsored thing that is kind of really bringing people together, and your chat was very interesting. So I think my colleague Risha was like, we really need this guy on the Leader Series podcast. So if you hadn't been so good at that presentation, Ewan, you might not go on to this, but yeah, for your sins. But it'd be great just to understand a little bit about yourself and your background, because I feel that it's quite interesting the way it's kind of moved from kind of almost science into technology, which is interesting, but also a bit about Oxford BioDynamics, what they're doing, and how really they are progressing science. So if you could just give that to us before we start, that would be great.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the invite, David. It's an honor to be here. So, I'm very glad to talk about something that I'm lucky to do, I'm passionate about. So my background, as I'm what you would call now a computational biologist, and we are, so I started off my first degrees in biochemistry, and then which I did at Edinburgh, and then after that I came to what was what was Guy's and St Thomas's, which then joined with merged with King's, and I did a PhD in molecular neurobiology. What I was looking at was the different parts of how the midbrain and hindbrain develop, and I was using a lot of early gene expression, mostly manual, and then doing quite a bit of sequencing, and that it was the early days of using things like Perl and things like that for sequence alignment. And so I got very interested in high throughput data analytics, and I knew that I didn't want to do academic science, and I was interested in commercial science. So I then moved into from my PhD into commercial science. This was around 2000, and this is when the first commercial microarrays and mathematics came out. For the first little bit, I was like looking at programming liquid handling robots, and then I worked for a company in America, based in the UK. So we were setting up what was the first software for gene expression analysis, and that was a spin out from Stanford, and it was the same lab that developed the first microarray. So from there, it basically progressed from data analytics or statistics. Then once you find data, what do you do with it? You need to understand it and get interpretation and knowledge from it. And that then led me into network biology. And from that company, we were bought by Agilent, and and from that point onwards, we were looking at multiple omic data with Agilent. It was proteomics, metabolomics, genomics, transcriptomics. And so these are all the things that you use to measure differences in living entities, so humans, animals, plants. And once you start building up this large amount of information, you need to bring it together and get meaning from it. And that's where then I got pushed. I was interested in looking at network biology. And then so I started working for companies, again, mostly all US based companies, but based in Europe, looking at network biology and trying to tease out the knowledge from all of this measurements. So you have all this analytes, all these different ways of looking at life, and then asking, what does it mean? And so that's when I moved into, as I said, network biology. And from there, from my early days at Edinburgh, I was always interested in epigenetics. So this is the level that controls genomics above nucleotides. So DNA is obviously an AGTC, which are nucleotides, and that builds up the double helix. But there's lots of control that goes on the genome, and one of them is called epigenetics, which sits on top of the code, the genomic code. And that was originally from Adrian Bird's lectures in Edinburgh. And that's when I joined OBD, which was 13 years ago now. And from there, I've been originally helping Oxford BioDynamics, which I'll describe what they do in a minute, to build up their business and also build up their tech stack, and then get a wider adoption of the technology. So it started off from the early days of my first degree through to a PhD, through to working up to multiple data analytics, and then latterly I've been doing software development, statistical development, machine learning development, and bringing all that together in a technology stack that we offer from Oxford BioDynamics. So that gives you a bit of a background where I am. I can go and describe what Oxford BioDynamics do, and how technology is really important to us, and how we use that to work with clients and partners to basically help them address their clinical and clinical needs.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and we'll obviously move on to Oxford BioDynamics because it's within a certain industry and quite kind of. But also, what's interesting to me is I could obviously talk about the journey of a career. I think you mentioned to me just then that they sometimes used to watch films. But I think you mentioned Gattaca, or I guess Minority Report, or something like that. Is those types of films?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always interested. If you started in 2000 and it's now 2025, could you foresee like how tech was going to move? Because it appears to me that tech is kind of catching up now with science fiction itself.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So you mentioned, one of the films I was always fascinated by was Gattaca.
Yeah.
It had Jude Law in it, and Ethan Hawke's, and yeah, definitely her.
Good lineup that was. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was great. And it's the early days of when so I did my degree 92, 96, PhD 96, 2000. I was sitting thinking that's impossible. You can't just take someone's DNA, work out the genetic abnormalities, the differences in the genetic code, and then obviously it has a bit of eugenics in there, which is which is not so good. But what it had is the ability to on real time detect differences and then do selection of humans. So I didn't think that would ever be possible, but now it is. We're at the fourth. We're really, really pretty close to that. There is a natural issue in terms of how fast you can sequence, but those sequencers now are very, very, very fast and very high throughput. And then it comes into interpretation of what that information means. That's really where we are at Oxford BioDynamics. What does that information mean, and does it help address, needs? Obviously, in that film, it was very nefarious and how it was being used, but that we are getting to that point, and you're right. It feels a little bit like science fiction, but it's very close. And obviously, in the last couple of weeks, the government is really keen on sequencing newborns to basically look at their progression, and that's really that longitudinal information will help with understanding how, because all diseases other than genetic diseases are progressive, so it's the interplay between your genetic code and the environment, and how adaptable your genetic code is to adapt to the environmental impacts, which are your food, your exercise, how you live your life, and all that has, what you drink, if you smoke, or you do other things, and that's basically, it's like a register of how your body's adapting, and that's what Oxford BioDynamics looks at. But yeah, you're right. And then the other thing which has come along with that is it's a lot of data, and so you need, what's happened in that period of time as well in those 25 years is the expansion of cloud computing, very fast orientated databases, very good ML flow type approaches, and then obviously come into the realms of reasoning tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity. Those are still a long way to go in terms of understanding life science and biology, but what it shows is that once you start formalizing that information, you can start to get some novel insight to what are the problems.
So just to kind of bring it back before we talk about Oxford Biodynamics, for those that aren't, I'm not, but I've heard coming. So when we talk about genomics, we're talking about people's genes and DNA and how to map those and how to use those for, health and pharmaceutical and preventative measures. Would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when we're talking about things like, in terms of like diagnostics and I think you mentioned there kind of sequencing newborns is like basically newborn babies taking the DNA register and seeing, I guess, like, is that just like watching evolution happen, right? That's how evolution happens, because your DNA changes according to your environment. That's it.
Yeah.
That is amazing, isn't it, really? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, again, like you think about, like, if you'd said to Darwin 200 years ago, right, we're going to be able to work, like, be able to track all the DNA, and, he'd probably sat there thinking, wow, I don't need to write this, but it's amazing. So what you have now, and you mentioned data there, is what you have now there is in some ways, I guess, the kind of keys to the kingdom in terms of, health and, health kind of services and how to, prolong life, understand life. Would you say that we are in the kind of golden period, as it were, or the start of a golden period of research? And
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Oh, we're definitely at the start of it. I could say that when we were having earlier discussion, the genome has been sequenced for 25 years. Okay, we've got we've very limited understanding of it still. Because everybody considered where the genes are, depending on who you talk to, about 28,000 to 30,000. And, around that, there's a lot of sequence, which they call junk DNA, which it really isn't. This is the bit that doesn't make proteins through, from the genes. And that part of the genome, a lot of people call it the dark genome. And the reason why, it's a good term, because they don't understand what it does. And so you need to, before you start to understand the genome, you need to know what all this information does, or regions of the genome, because it's there for a region. And really what it is to do, how do you control transcription? So transcription is how a gene is converted from the DNA into a conjugate, which is messenger RNA, which then goes into, which is translated into a protein. And so all of that is the fine tuning of how, as you said, the environment impacts how, if you've got some intrinsic pathology, so some underlying condition. And so what we've done is that, we have the ability to interrogate it, but we still need quite a lot of work to understand what that non-coding or dark part of the genome is doing. So for it, just as a number, if you look at all the SNPs that have been, which was literally, there's 3 billion bases. So all the single nucleotides, and then these are little markers that look at difference between patients. So these are nucleotides, which will be different between me and you and the wider population. A lot of them are the same. And, ones which are associated to disease, 98% of them are in that non-coding region or the dark genome. So that means there's an awful lot of effect and regulation that isn't captured by just purely sequencing genes. So that is, so you are right. We're really at the start of that. So we know how to build this information, but then we need to understand what this information means. And so we're really at the start of it.
And how is Oxford BioDynamics, just to move on to OBD themselves, which is a UK-based company, Oxford-based company, I think. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Great. How is that? How are you guys locked into that particular journey? What's your core area?
Yeah, so we are, so we're a spin out from Oxford University. So it's founded by a guy called Alexander Kulichev and another co-founder, Arul Ramadas. So Arul was a postdoc in Alexander's lab in Oxford, and he worked over in the US, and he's a transcription person. So transcription is the bit that converts DNA into to functional elements like proteins. And what they do, and what they're looking at, is that everybody assumes that DNA is linear, but it's not. It has a three-dimensional structure. And so what Oxford BioDynamics is doing is look, it has proprietary capability of interpreting or understanding what that 3D structure of the genome does. So there, what that three-dimensional structure is taking a piece of real estate, which can be in Edinburgh, and bring it all the way down to London. So with a loop, so something which is in linear space, very, very far away, but bring a regulatory element down to the start of a gene to basically modulate or change its translation or expression. And so what 3D architecture is a very important way of controlling or fine-tuning genomic regulation. And so Oxford BioDynamics has an algorithm which looks at certain features in the genome, and we know where these, what we call anchor points, which are engaged to each other through loops. So they are, we have an algorithm that tells us where they are. And then that then allows us to build up a big repository of loops. So there's roughly about 15 million of these. And what we can then do is go in and interrogate them, because we have they've developed the chemistry to measure this type of information in the wet lab. So you've got the in silico part, which is the computation part, and then you can then very quickly put it into the lab and then use that within life science research. So we as a company, I see us as a life science company, but in the last 4 years, we've been developing our own tests, two which are commercially available for prostate screening, which is very prominent at the moment in the UK, and then another one for drug response for checkpoint inhibitors, which are the biggest selling drugs in the world at the moment for oncology.
So that basically, because you can identify these particular areas where the technology, as it were, can be used and put into use and show certain things, and you can start to develop applications around that, which would obviously, with the technology and the genomic mapping, would be much more efficient and much more successful, I assume, than that which you'd have had like 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, no, you're completely correct. And so as you know, everybody's well, maybe lots of different GPS systems on their phone. So you might have Waze or Google Maps. Before, I remember in the early days of when I was traveling to Germany or Switzerland using an old map, and it's very imprecise. And now you have, obviously GPS coordinates that, you can tap into a phone, and it can take you pretty much to this, even if you've never been there. So at the moment, if you don't know where these anchor points are, you have to do a very laborious blind approach, which is one, to do it on a clinical level is very expensive and very labor intensive. So having those GPS coordinates for the anchors basically cuts through overhead, makes it very quick, and we can scale very quickly and bring it into the clinical test is a very developed representation of that information. There is companies out there, pharma biotechs who do this, but what they're using is they assume the loop exists between A and B, because there is, as I mentioned, those single nucleotide SNPs, which basically say that it's associated to a disease, but it's so far away that it can be like a million miles away, but they just assume there's a loop. So they're doing all this blindly. So it's like playing blind man's buff. But we at OBD don't do this blindly. We have a very precise mechanism to identify that, and then that allows us a huge advantage because cost is reduced, precision is increased, and speed. And we have the ability to use that not only in the wet lab, but we can build all of this information into big technology stacks like large language modeling to basically make those types of reasoning questions quicker and more precise.
And I guess, like, when we were doing when I was at TVAI or the hub, I think there was a questionnaire session, wasn't there, where I think the first question went on was a Bill Gates quote, said in X amount of time, then there will be no more GPs. And I think that started the questioning, because there was a group of maybe half GPs NHS in the UK and then half technologists and scientists. And the questions were really, if I remember rightly, around that: will this happen? And I think the answer was no. But I guess, like, when you talk about these steps forward that could be made, there's a lot of structure and there's a lot of industry based around that would be, it's the same for all AI and machine learning, but would be broken by this. I
Yeah.
mean, it can really help something, but it also would change a whole method of delivery that is built up over maybe 100 years. And when you're going into these markets, do you see kind of pushback, or do you see that's part of the difficulty of rollout? I know within like the public sector or against competitors.
Yeah, no, it does. So your question is right. I mean, fundamentally, uh, uh, it will have the potential to I'm not saying replace, but it will be something where that triage and things can be done. Not everything is genomically driven, definitely, but if you think about what anything is in terms of everything stems from your genetic capability. It's not only, if you speak to different people, they'll say, oh, what about this, what about that? But it's the fundamental framework where, you can't get a protein if you don't have the sequence. So with medicine is that, it's still, if you go to three different doctors, you'll get three different opinions, because they all have, their own language model. Sorry for talking technical, but they have their own, biases and preferences, and so they will say they will say one doctor will say one thing, another will say another, and I think that ambiguity will be taken out with these types of platforms, and the other thing is that we are really only at the beginning, and I think that was basically what some of the concept was of that meeting, is that I don't, what we have now is the ability to use these tools to address these questions, and I think that some of the clinical scientists, which are MDs, PhDs, are really those are the guys that really push this forward, and we will get there. It will just take time, and there is pushback, because because one, people know what they know, and the other thing is they don't know what they don't know, and if it's new, and they're always a bit more hesitant to adopt it, and there is there's a famous saying from Max Planck that says science advances at one funeral at a time. So, people inherently are hesitant to this, but I think the benefit is going to outweigh the negativity. But I genuinely believe that we're moving in a good direction, and as you said, things speed up, and it will speed up even quicker, because there'll be a need, a push for this by people.
And you're now in a, like, again, if you track through your career from a scientist through to, senior director through to, but now you're like the CDO of this business, right? So you're the leader, and to kind of get into our kind of leader series kind of questions,
Hmm.
how do you deal with, is there a different way of dealing with leadership when everything is changing so fast and the technology is advancing? Just to give you a bit of context, recruitment is probably exactly the same technology and has not made any advances in terms of technology in 25 years, right? I would suggest the job is pretty much exactly the same, except maybe people use LinkedIn rather than cards. Whereas in your industry, and particularly now in the last 2 to 3 years with the coming of more powerful AI and cloud tools, it must be quite difficult to kind of keep on top of it, as it is your job to be the leader and decide which way to go and what to do and what we're going to focus on today.
Hmm. No, yeah, definitely. I mean, luckily, um, okay, so luckily the technology that we use is kind of bleeding edge, i.e., how you interpret the genome, and um, that has one thing, so we're very well versed at that. The other one is, there is a lot of frameworks to implement your technology into. So, do you do, is it, do you containerize it? I.e., do you, do you do, do you have like, how do you scale it? How do you get end users using this? Then on top of that, there is, regulation if it's something involved in drug development. So there's not only, so there's the technology side and the regulatory side. Luckily that, obviously through contacts, and relationships with other people, you keep up on top of you can't be always on top of everything. But that's why, we have different guys in the team who are. And, it's just working as a team. My strengths are how you use this technology to address, life science and clinical needs. And then the other guys in the team may be helping with basically how you deploy this in a bigger scale on AWS or Google or Azure. And then the other people may be better at front end development and things like this. But, because as a team, we're data scientists, software developers, DevOps, and project managers. So one thing that I have noticed as things evolve, you have to have many hats on when you're doing this. But I think what you have to do is that we do have a clear mission and what we're trying to do with our technology, and we may not be domain experts in certain types of things like DevOps, but there's areas where we have lots of strength, and we use that to basically, forge forward. But the other thing where complexity comes into is how regulation sits on top of this.
And you would probably put them in the right same sort of context, but as a leader, are scientists different to manage or lead than computer people? And do they have different? I don't know. I'm just quite interested to see. Or are they similar sorts of mindsets?
Yeah, they are. uh,
Right.
it depends what level you get them at. I luckily, my team. So we're what you would consider a life science company, and when my team was the biggest, which we had about 8 people, I only, apart from me, there was only one other PhD biologist. The rest of them were either computational scientists, physicists, PhD chemists, and there's a couple of MSc biologists. Luckily, they've all been very, very good, and they all have different capabilities. But yeah, certainly, luckily, I don't have to deal with the wet lab too much. But it's mostly, software development, data scientists, people who are more. I mean, I have noticed that I've not really come across too much of a problems with those types of people. Certainly, in my career, yeah, certainly come across different characters in different areas, and some are easier to deal with and some are not.
Because I guess when it comes down to another thing you mentioned earlier was, in the end, what we're doing now is we're taking the data and trying to make sense of it in a technology world, right? Which is quite a standard IT data scientist thing to do, right? So while what you're actually using in terms of the data is much more complex than if Tesco were doing their, customer reports or something like that, in the end, this, like you said, this path of looking at data, understanding data, is a well-trodden path in other industries, isn't it? So you can just
Hmm.
use the processes that have already been implemented.
Yeah, you know, uh, the basically, all of that real-time framework analytics, is kind of spearheaded by, like you say, people like Tesco's and retailers and banking and things like this. And we don't need to have immediate real-time analytics like you may have, when you come across the border with your biometric passport and things like this. You know, well, it's the same type of framework that we would use, but we don't need to have that, instantaneous um, uh, capability. But I do know people who work in the areas, and and when you talk to them about the frameworks that they have, it's not dissimilar to what we do, just on a different scale and a bigger scale, and there's more pressure that on their particular KPIs, which maybe they need to be fast processing back to a database, back to the processing unit, whereas ours is a lot of our stuff is more on what does the information mean, as opposed to just it's a binary answer, yes or no. So what you have to do is build a lot of tools around how you interpret that information and make it easier for the end user to do that.
So, and you talked there about having that kind of clear mission that everyone's kind of working towards. So how do you kind of balance that long-term vision versus the kind of short-term, the operational needs, like we need to do this today, need to do this today?
Yeah, it's difficult. Because the long-term vision always gets dented by short-term needs. And
I know that well myself. Yeah. So.
um, well, my job is to keep that long-term vision in my mind, and help get the guys to help with that. Because obviously they may get pulled left, right, and center. And generally it gets channeled through me, but there's a lot of demand because in the team we're all the things that I mentioned: software developers, project managers, ML people, tech development, algorithm development, all of that. Plus, also we have to do operational stuff as well. So there might, from time to, or even do finance stuff, believe it or not. So from time to time, the short-term needs. So what you have to do is, I'm very clear on what we're trying to do. So when things, let's say we have to spend a week on doing project-based work, which requires a lot of ML, machine learning, and you just allocate that resource to people. But there's always at least one person who's always doing product development. So product development is keeping that long-term vision in place. So I'm always aware that we need to have at least one person doing that, and then the other people doing, even myself, will get dragged into doing the day-to-day stuff as well. It's just, but we're one thing which is very good is having that, we do have a very defined long-term view where we want to get to, and everything's is adding to that. But there is things which, the day-to-day stuff, this is the reason, partly probably why it's taken so long to get to this discussion, is those short-term problems do crop up and you have to deal with them.
Yeah, don't judge that. It just means you're a busy man, and it's absolutely fine. So, and I
Either
get,
it's busier or not enough people. That's it.
well, that's right. Well, obviously, yeah. There's always. If only there was a great technology recruitment agency out there that could help you. I
Yeah,
don't know who
definitely.
would they be. But anyway,
Yeah,
and I guess like for me, from the sound of your business, and this is something I'm quite interested in. It sounds like it's actually progressing into a point where there will be that big growth, because it's almost as if the world is now caught up with what you're doing, and you're a successful business, but now you can actually, with technology that's available, actually truly deliver across the board. And I don't always ask this question in all my conversations, but do you as a senior team think about that in terms of kind of forward planning? You know, we could need
yeah,
to expand like by 10 or globally or something. We may hit the next level of growth, which all companies want to do, but it sounds to me like you're close to that at this moment in time, just due to where you position yourself and kind of what the healthcare world needs. So is that something that's on your mind in terms of the levels that you need to be in order to hire or to change the method of working or whatever?
yeah. No, definitely. Obviously, I'm on the C-level discussions, and the strategy and how we move forward as a company is very pertinent. We talk about it all the time. The other things as well is that even though we're a public company, the other thing which impacts or impedes things is resource, and what that is money. So you are right. We are at a point where we're really aggressively in the early stage of pushing this tech stack out there, and getting people more adopted to it. So we are talking to a couple of fairly big companies to help us with that. So they have, bigger resources in terms of, networks of sales, because ultimately all of this has to be sold. And, you can have the best thing in the world, but if no one's going to buy it, it doesn't matter. So, very key on making sure that this is something that people want and need. Um, we will be at a point where we will have to resource up, and we're already roughly, we do need more people, as I've already mentioned that a few times. And y- yeah, I mean, because as more people use this, there's more, change requests, can you do this? Can you do that? So that's really, that will then push the company into the where I work, into people who are hardcore developers, to R&D, and R&D in terms of new approaches to analyzing data or new frameworks. So it's an exciting place to be, and I really want to get there as quickly as possible. But what we need to do is what we have currently is get that out there, and selling it to people.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a really interesting, and that's that, that's that area that all businesses want to get to, which is kind of hyper growth, isn't it? You see these other businesses doing, and you always think to yourself, how do you get there? But really, what you need to do is strike upon something that everyone wants and everyone wants to invest in. Do you think that there's more that I mean, you mentioned again at the top about the government and backing businesses within biotech. Do you think there's more that the government can do? Because they talk a lot about startup culture and unicorns and that sort of thing. I mean, for a business like yours, is there more that the government could do to help you get to that phase?
Britain is notoriously good at ideas, but it's very bad at commercializing them. Uh, and we have a rich strength, a rich um, uh, corpus of ideas, and good research scientists, and bring but bringing a good idea to a commercial level is very difficult. I think that there could be, one of the things about one of the things for companies in the UK is very um, bad access to non-diluting capital to develop your company or idea, because as soon as you go into private equity or VC, that they're pretty aggressive with how much percentage that you would want. So it would be good. I think the government could help in the way that they could offer. They do this for exporting and things like this. If there was a way, I know that you can get grants and things like this, but that takes a long time. But if there was a way to access funds which could accelerate ideas quickly. I know that there's Innovate UK, but all of that takes time, and it'd be something which, is effectively like government VC, but very, very non-diluting to do that. I know that the government just this month has released a 10-year life science sector plan, and they say all the right things. They want to basically, Britain has a very good history of developing things, but it's very difficult to develop them as further if you don't have access to funding. And the market in the US is more it looks all of it, where we would be considered a life science technology or a medical um, equipment company, whereas like maybe in London they're only looking at drug development. That's what they measure against. So the government could do more. There is obviously bureaucracy and things like this. The other thing where they could help is an easier access into NHS for people. What that means is that's where the bureaucracy kicks in. Easier access into you know um, using NHS resources. What that means is patients to validate or expand on tools that people do. The big one at the moment is, which would be very good for us, is the prostate cancer screening. So we have a test which reduces the false positive rate that the PSA test does. But we're a British company on AIM, and trying to get that, we've worked with Imperial College and NHS, but trying to get a wider adoption in that is pretty difficult. So, we've done that through prostate cancer research. or they've been working with us. But it's still very difficult. So there's lots they could do. And fundamentally, it can be down to, I see it as helping with funding, uh, and also making it easier to work with the NHS as a company.
Yeah, I think that's, in the end, the NHS is pretty much a singular thing that doesn't really exist anywhere else. So for companies, in its form, so if we as a country in the UK get it right, it could be very good for Britain in terms of helping businesses like yours to grow, but also helping people in Britain to have the best possible access to healthcare, which you and I sit and read the news and listen to the news is obviously one of
Yeah,
the key things they say. But I guess that's down to the politicians, not down to the recruiters or the scientists. That's beyond
no.
our pay grade, or we just
Well,
need to
yeah,
focus
and
on our own jobs. So
yeah, and then the thing is, UK has done. It's got the UK Biobank. It's got the Genomics England. So they're the first place to do hundreds. Like they've got like 500,000 patients that which are being sequenced, and other companies around the world are accessing that. And it would be, that's a resource that's been developed by public funding. I would think they would, they could make it easier for a British company who employs British people, or who, they might not be British people, but they might be putting revenue into the exchequer through an income tax to make it easier for us to access that level of information, to make it easier for us. Because the thing is, if you're a company and you have a test which the NHS can use, the first question you get asked, why is the NHS not using it? So, there's lots of things you could do.
I think it's a big shout out to Mr. Starmer
Yeah,
if you're
yeah,
excited about growth, Mr. Starmer, then Oxford BioDynamics is a good call. So
yeah.
give Ewan a call. Ewan, what's the most exciting? I think from the sounds of this that your career, your business, etc., is on the kind of cusp or a wave at the bleeding edge, like you said. So what most excites you about the 12 months to come? What's next for you?
Yeah, it's basically, well, they're, scaling the tech stack up, uh, uh, getting more paying customers to use the platform, get more paying customers to work with the wet lab part of the business, develop, as I know that as you engage with more people, you're going to get more ideas, and that helps you develop your own tools. And then, effectively build the company up to what it really deserves to be. It's a very, I when we're in manager meetings, we are sitting on a gold mine. It just needs to be mined properly. Excuse the pun. And that's our responsibility to do that. And ultimately, that comes down to people. So working with people like yourself I see very essential to help us develop going forward. So oh, sorry, I don't know what my computer's doing. Um, so I'm excited about getting this into the hands of users, and engaging with more scientists and tech people, and developing up the business to where it should be.
Fantastic. Well, Ewan, good luck. I think
Thank you.
we will put a bit of a glossary on our post just so people can really understand it. So I might reach out to you for a few terms there just
No
to
worries.
kind of break it down. But I think the key thing is that you and your company and your industry are really doing something that's really, really important for humankind, right? So thank you for that, and I wish you well in your adventures over the next couple of years. Well done.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks for the time today.
Thanks, Ewan.